Vabbè. La società unidirezionale.
Hello, everyone. I think we're starting to have a good turnout. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session of the Arctic Spring College, organized by the Arctic Institute. I hope everyone is doing well and ready to listen to our two wonderful speakers today. I can't see your faces. Oh, I can see some of you. Okay, so my name is Romain Chiffard. I'm a research associate and leadership group member at the Arctic Institute, and I'm filling in as moderator for today's session for Victoria Herman, who unfortunately cannot be with us today. As I said, we have two wonderful speakers today. First up is Inutek Holm Olsen, who's head of representation of Greenland in Washington, D.C., and who will speak to us for 20 to 40 minutes. And just before I hand it over to Inutek, I would like to remind you that if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to type them in the chat box throughout the presentations. Without further ado, please, Inutek, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roman, and thank you for that introduction as well. And hope you can all hear me and see me as well. I'm the head of the Greenland representation in Washington, D.C. I started actually to tell you a little bit about myself. I started this position like 7.5 years ago, starting the Greenland representation from scratch. We are located in the Danish embassy, but you know, through the self-rule agreement with Denmark, and it's actually a law that regulates our, you know, also our ability to operate in other countries, we independently represent the government of Greenland in all areas that Greenland has the authority on, and that includes a lot of, you know, issues. But issues like the foreign policy, security, and defense, you know, are still a responsibility of the Danish government. So we operate together with the Danish embassy on these. But to tell you a little bit more about, you know, the U.S.-Greenland relations, I mean, the way they go way back, and my task is to represent Greenland's interest towards the U.S. government on a number of issues, but also to foster more relations between the U.S. and Greenland, economically, you know, politically, educational, you know, and research and what have you. And, you know, the U.S.-Greenland relations go way back, if you think about it, way back to the World War. Well, I mean, it started I guess, in intensifying with World War II. But even if you go further back, Robert Perry, the admiral, who went to the North Pole, I mean, he and the other explorers, used Greenland kind of, as a starting point for their adventures. But without further ado, I mean, I'm gonna give us a pictorial presentation. I have a few pictures, that I'm gonna share with you, and I mean they range. I mean, those represent, I think, current issues that we are dealing with in Greenland, and the range from the global ramification of like the death of George Floyd, to recent political elections in Greenland, municipal as well as parliamentary elections. So I'm going to try to see if I can master this technology. But let me see. How do I mean, yeah, if someone, do I click share to share the screen first?
Yes, the green button at the bottom of your screen.
Okay. And then what? How do I access my PowerPoint then?
So we can see your screen. So wherever you've stored your presentation on your own computer, this might be where the PowerPoint is.
Let me see. Now let me go to the PowerPoint. I mean, all this virtual stuff is so, for someone who's not technologically adept, it's, can you see this?
Yes, we can, yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, so let me just start it. This is a municipal map of Greenland. It's divided up in 5 different municipalities, as you can see, from the colors, how they are divided. But then you also have, the world's largest national park in the northeast of Greenland, population 25. And then you also have a list of the different towns and villages. I think there's 72 if you count both, towns and villages together that are spread out. Most of them, if you look at it, most of the people live on the southwest coast of Greenland, because if you go from south up to the Arctic Circle, that to Sisimiut, that's basically ice-free all year round, so you can navigate with ships all year round. And then if you go a little bit further up the west coast, usually, the ocean usually freezes, but not so much, in recent years because of the warming, oceans. We can clearly see that, the effect of that. And then you have two smaller towns on the east coast, Tasiilaq and Ittoqqortoormiit. And then, and of course, the further up the west coast is Qaanaaq, and that's 150 kilometers north of the Thule Air Base, the American military presence in Greenland. Economically, I mean, fisheries is the most important industry that we have, and that's that will continue to be so. I mean, we have. We are working on diversifying our economy to also include mining, which I'm going to go into a little bit further, because that was a big subject in the recent elections. but cold water shrimps, red Greenland halibut, cod, and redfish are some of the most important species that we catch. But we also have also seen new species like herring and mackerel coming into Greenland waters in the last couple of years because of they follow kind of their food source, and then also that's an indication of changing ocean temperatures. This is a picture of the Tantrus Project that was a subject or is a subject of very much debate in recent months. If I am to go through a little bit of, in a short period of time of the mining process, is that, companies you have a lot of companies with exploration projects that have exploration projects, and that those develop over a number of years, and it's the most promising ones that reach a kind of a further a stage where they can determine through a feasibility study that that they are feasible. But before you go from an exploration process to an exploitation process, there's a environmental, you have to have the environmental reports, and then you also have a public hearing process, as well as before you can commence, you have to have an agreement between the government, the municipality, and the company on how to maximize, for example, local employment and use of local companies when you do mining. But in terms of this project and another one, those are located in the most southern part of Greenland, and those are the two two of the world's largest known deposits of rare earths. But this one, has an byproducts of uranium, and the uranium issue has been very controversial because in the past there used to be a moratorium to give any exploration licenses to actually to projects that involve uranium. But in 2014, the Parliament of Greenland, through a very narrow majority, actually one-person majority, overturned that moratorium, and that meant that projects like this one, the Tantrus Project, could go on. But the company reached a state, where a public consultation process was going to commence, and then there was a whole debate, because of the COVID, there's limitations on how many people can be assembled. There was a discussion whether should we wait, until things are much better, but the government decided to just continue with this, and that's I think that's when you also started a really kind of a heated process of discussion among the public, also because there were the elections were also called on because the coalition of the parties of the government fell apart, because the leading party, some voices among the leading party began to question, their support for this, even though they had, been kind of supporting the whole process of this project in the past. But the issue of uranium is very much, kind of at the center. It's not so much the actual mining. I think everybody in Greenland, also the current new government, supports them. Different mining projects, but it's the issue of uranium, because it's evident that the environmental impacts of uranium, even as a byproduct, and the issue of tailings was something that worried a lot of the people who were in that particular area of Greenland, but also I think, I mean, also the rest of the country for that matter. But this project, this actual, the location of this project is actually quite close. Like, I think it's like 9 kilometers from the town of Nassau. So the tailings, they were going to dump, them in a lake, and also including large deposits of thorium, uranium, that was going to be present for I think hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, and they were very much worried about if the surrounding area that's kind of like the breadbasket of Greenland, so to speak, because there's a lot of sheep farms around that in South Greenland, which are also producing vegetables. So that's why it was so I think became so heated. But at the same time, we also know that rare earths are critical if we are to develop renewable energy forms like batteries and in the windmill, and as well as they're also important in production of technological devices like mobile phones and other high-tech devices. So yeah, it's an interesting discussion that's been taking place there, I think. This is the second rare earth project that's actually very close to the other Greenland project. I mean, you have a fjord, you can't see the actual water, but it's separated by the fjord here. And this is the Tantrus Project, also rare earths, but this one doesn't contain uranium as a byproduct. So this one's, I think, and they just actually, I think it was last summer that they received the exploitation license. So they, can go on in their process of attracting, foreign investments, as well as, make more concrete plans to exploit the site of the project. So, as I said, we just had elections on April 6th, and this is the results. You have 7 parties in the last, parliament, but the result of the elections here meant that 2 parties didn't receive enough votes, and that's Samarbejdspartiet SA and then NQ. They only had, I think, 1 seat, in the previous parliament. So, they were very, very small, and small parties tend to, you see, new parties form, every now and then, in different cycles, but they usually don't last, more than a couple of years, and that's probably also the case with these 2 small parties. But Inuit Ataqatigiit, EA, became the largest party. It's always been a question between Inuit Ataqatigiit and Siumut. Siumut and EA have always historically been the 2 largest parties, but Siumut has been in power for most of, the home rule era, starting from 79. EA was in power only from 2009 to 2013, and that's the only time actually where the dominance of Siumut has been broken. So, but now we are, now we reach a new kind of era as well, where EA will be the leading party for the next 4 years. Usually, in kind of a democracies and parliamentary democracies, you can talk about, where parties stand, on the left or the right, but with regard to Greenlandic parties, it's more difficult. They don't follow kind of the traditional left-right, kind of a line, but they're more kind of a mixed, in this issue, for example. You can, for example, take the issue of independence, for example, which is, something that we can do if we want to. Some parties are for greater cooperation and relationship, between Greenland and Denmark. Others want to be independent in a quicker way. Others want to kind of take it in a slower process. So it's, but the interesting part is that, Inuit Ataqatigiit IA and Naleaq, has formed a coalition government, and Naleaq has been kind of a much more, I think, nationalistic in their quest for independence, for example, while IA is more focused on, traditionally they were started as kind of a socialist party, so they still have that kind of a tradition in mind, and more focused on, social issues, on addressing social issues, and trying to minimize the difference between rich and poor, and so. But still, they're also, pro-independence. So it will be interesting to see, how that plays out in the coming years. And this will be, this is our new premier, Mutti B. The youngest one in Greenland. He's 34 years old and leader of the EA party. And the parliament will, confirm him on Friday, this coming Friday. So it's an exciting time for us, I think all of us, because we will see, I think, hear new voices, because EA, they, his party campaigned, for example, against the Greenland project, and the municipal elections that were held at the same time. Also in South Greenland, they became the leading party as well. So, the voters, I think, took a clear stand on that issue as well. And this is the new group of ministers that were presented on last Friday. We'll have a new Minister for Foreign Affairs, but he will have this, the areas of responsibility of industry, trade, and foreign affairs, as well as climate issues. And his name is Pele Broberg. He's from the Naleaq party. He's the second from left. Yeah, we look forward to working with him. Whoops. Oh no, okay. I thought I had another picture of the statue of Hans Egede, because that was one of the issues that came up actually last summer, as a result of the death of George Floyd, because the whole, the interesting thing about international relations, is that, how events in one place affects, issues in other countries. And the death of George Floyd, sparked a worldwide kind of a debate and on the issue of, the history of slave trade, the history of colonialism, also because as a result, of the statue, because there's a statue of the Norwegian missionary Hans Egede, who came to Greenland in 1721, and this is, the 300-year anniversary. some won't call it an anniversary because it also depends on where you stand on the issue of on statues and what they represent. But he was his statue on top of a hill in Nuuk, was sprayed with the words "decolonize," and there were paintings, thrown at him, and that started a whole debate of, the whole issue of what he represented as a statue, and whether we should commemorate, for example, the 300-year mark for his arrival in Greenland, which colonized Greenland and made it into and also made that Greenland became a like a Protestant religion. I mean, he converted them from the traditional Inuit religion to Christians, which we are still part of today. I mean, the church and state are not separated in Greenland, which follows kind of the Nordic model. So the Lutheran Church, is our official church or religion, and that's. I wouldn't say that Greenlanders are traditionally very religious. I think our grandparents' generations and those before, very, but culturally, the church still plays an important, I think, role in today's, even today. But I think my point is, that the issue of decolonization, having been a colony of Denmark, are still very much, I think, present in a lot of Greenlanders' eyes, and that the whole thing about George Floyd and the movement for Black Lives Matter and police brutality spilled over to the issue of statues and that even in Denmark, where they began to discuss, what these different statues represented in and around Copenhagen, and found out that the slave trade, that Denmark was a part of, for example, through the Virgin Islands. The U.S. Virgin Islands used to be Danish until 1917, and they had profited, from a lot from that trade and using slaves, and a lot of the castles, in around Copenhagen are built around that. So, yeah. So new and exciting times are, I think. Oops. Sorry. So sorry about that. But I think with the election of the new government. We are, I think, facing new and exciting times, but we have yet to see, I think, it's too early to say, what exactly will happen, but they have, of course, made their coalition agreement on things that they want to achieve. But the dynamics between, for example, these two parties will be interesting also, I think, in the years to come, on how they play out. So I think with those words, I think, I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Huyanak Inutek, for such a comprehensive presentation about independence, colonial history, and recent political development in Greenland. Are there any questions for Inutek? I see one from Samuel in the chat about rare earth elements. Sam, would you like to unmute yourself to ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for a really fantastic talk. It was really interesting. Just on the subject of sort of mining and foreign investment in Greenland, there's a lot of interest currently in, like, the UK, Greenland as an alternative source of rees to mitigate somewhat China's monopoly. While China is interested in sort of investing in Greenland because there's going to be a re-bottleneck in sort of the 2030s that it wants to avoid. And already in 2019, there were sort of tensions over an airport, with China wishing to invest in one for Greenland and the US sort of stepping in to prevent it over security concerns. Do you see a way sort of forward for Greenland to balance these kind of competing interests between sort of two competitors essentially in the region? And how might there be a way forward for sort of Greenland in that area?
Yeah, excellent question, because I mean the whole China issue is an added layer to all these different things that we have to deal with. But I think it's also kind of important to dissect each and one of them, because it can easily become I think overblown to a certain extent. If we take, for example, the rare earth issue, I mean, as you said, China has a monopoly, and they have the know-how for processing that, which I think the Western kind of countries, have allowed, and what we've been saying, if you want to break that dominance of China, you have to gain back, their processing, I think, ability, because right now it's China that almost has a monopoly, basically, but because we entering, the whole security issue, national security issues, when we talk about that. But we have the ability, Greenland has the ability, yes, to break that dominance, but it requires that countries like the US, Australia, Canada, and others, developed, I think, the processing ability to be able to do that. And I know, I mean, the US and Canada has, strategic kind of a cooperation on critical minerals, for example. So we are beginning to see, I think, more and more awareness on addressing that issue, because I know for the US it's very important, because it also has military ramifications. But in terms of, I mean, I want to address the Chinese kind of interest in the airport issue, because as you said, we are developing our infrastructure, and that includes building 2 new airports in Nuuk and Ilulissat. But it was actually, if I am to simplify it, we were actually going to pay China to build these airports. There were 6 companies that were pre-approved to make a bid, in a competitive bid to construct the airports, and we are paying for it. But it was presented, I think, in a way that that China was offering itself and its money and workers, to build these, and that's not the case. It's a Chinese company was one among I think 6 in total that could bid, but they ended up not bidding. But a Danish company won, ended up winning the contract. But there were also companies from the Netherlands, and Canada, Iceland, and Denmark, that were among the bidders. But it's true. I mean, I think the whole Chinese, competition, to be more present in a global scale is very much also affecting us, and I think but our position is that we can, as a very small country that's dependent on trade, we cannot just say, oh, we don't want to deal with the Chinese, because China is actually a very important export market for fish products, and will Europe is the largest, but Japan and China are very much also growing in importance. So we have to kind of balance our abilities. I mean, nobody wants the conditions of what China is, I think, doing in Africa, for example, or the debt, the trap, that people are talking about or anything. But I mean, we would like to trade with China, but we're also aware of, that there are some security concerns, for example, with infrastructure ownership of, some critical infrastructure. But we are, working with Denmark and actually the Faroe Islands on a law. I think Europe has been, working on a screening mechanism for investments, for infrastructure, which we are also, working on right now as we speak. But we are at the same time we are saying, we are going to, or we want to develop these different sectors, minerals, tourism, fisheries, because they are necessary for our continued both economic as well as political development. If we want to, for example, decrease the amount that Denmark provides us to us every year. So it's a first come, first served basis, and we also saying, you can't just say, oh, don't deal with those over there, because if you don't present yourself as a viable alternative, we don't have that luxury, so and we will, of course represent our interest and but we will work on developing our different natural resources, because we're not in a position to say, oh, we're going to develop our IT sector, because we have so many programmers, people who work on programming, that we have. Small country, you have to I think develop your strengths, and with Greenland, it's our natural resources that we have.
Thank you very much for that.
Sure.
Tech. We have a few other questions. So we have one from Dave. Dave, would you like to unmute yourself to ask a question?
Yeah, I would love to. Thanks so much for talking with us today. So I have some deep particular interest in regards to the new government perspective on Thule Air Base. And I understand that you're in a very interesting position, having been the chief of representation there, now going through a transition of government, but still remaining in your position, where, in the United States, a lot of times when we change our government, we pull our representatives and install new folks, but you get to be there for that transition. So my background is I'm a military planner for NORAD, and I've been one of the lead planners for several of the exercises and operations that we've been conducting at Thule and other Northern Tier and Arctic bases over the last several months, and then many more coming up, some of them including US aircraft, Canadian aircraft, potentially Danish aircraft participating in those operations out of Thule. I was also the operations team lead for the Thule Air Base site survey for the Thule Investment Project that's being proposed through NORAD right now. Estimated total ask on that is $2.2 billion that they're looking to potentially invest into that airbase. I know that that there has been some conflict with the base maintenance contract and some of the political regarding that. And so I was hoping that question number one, if you could just kind of enlighten us on how that Thule base maintenance contract has been complicating to the relationship between Greenland and the United States. And then also in reading the coalition agreement that the new government there in Greenland that came out on April 16th, there was a mention of a desire for Greenland to be demilitarized. And so I'm just curious how the new government is planning on trying to balance potential development of the Thule Air Base and then maybe some other infrastructure that may be in support of some of those operations with the desire for demilitarization.
Thank you for those questions. I mean, to start with the maintenance contract, the short history is that there's been a long history, also, I mean, bilateral agreement between the US, Denmark, and Greenland that civilian contracts should go to Danish Greenlandic companies when it comes to civilian projects in Thule Air Base. But in 2014, the U.S. Air Force awarded the contract to Vectrus, an American company that does, a number of, I think, contracts to the U.S. military, a number of different countries, and that sparked, kind of a very heavy debate, both in Denmark and Greenland, that the U.S. went against, what we had agreed with them, and that was a practice, for many years, because it's especially the taxation income from the civilian contract that that Greenland benefits from, and it's an important, I think, contribution to the Greenlandic, coffers of that civilian contract represents. So it was, I mean, we dealt with it for so long, for so many years, ever since I came, actually, until we were able to agree on a new criteria for issuing, the issuance of a new civilian maintenance contract last year. Actually, I think it was in November October, that we made a new agreement on a number of criteria that the U.S. Air Force should deal with, and trying to maximize the benefit to Greenland from the U.S. military presence. Because the Thule Air Base, I mean, yes, it's a very important, I think, part of the, for example, missile defense and, capabilities, watch what goes on, but also, I mean, it doesn't have the best history if you think about different incidents in the past. I won't go into those necessarily, but the point is that for us, and I think the U.S., the last administration especially recognized that, that we have to solve this, and because we kept saying, we can't move on, I think, from developing our bilateral relations until that, issue has been solved, and we were able to resolve it last year. And, besides that, I mean, solving that, I think we are also able to make a new agreement on a number of more economic issues not related to. With regard to the second part of your questions, we have, I mean, I think that's still too early to say, I mean, what they mean with demilitarization, because if you look at it, the next words are nothing with us, without us. And I mean, as I said, I think it's too early. I mean, we have to figure out what it is that they mean, with that. But we have seen, I mean, increased military, Russia, what they're doing with their, northern and Arctic bases, and increased militarization in the Arctic, and there is concern that, with that comes also there could be, misunderstood incidents, if institutions or communication lines are not in place, between the different militaries. But so, I would say, TBD, on that issue. But, but for us, I think it's very much, I think, satisfactory to be able to say that we've been able to solve the air-based maintenance contract, so we could move forward, with a whole range of issues between bilateral issues between Greenland and the U.S. So
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for talking with us today and for answering that. I appreciate it.
We have 2 questions from Sigrid. But before I read them, so Sigrid said she's at university, so unfortunately she cannot speak. But can I please remind everybody to make sure you're on mute? There's a bit of background noise and it's getting quite distracting. I mean, if you're not speaking, that is. So Sigrid says, if we can. Environmental organizations in Greenland are strongly opposing the Tantrus Project along with the newly elected government. However, what's the general public opinion outside of activism and EA on the Tantrus extraction? Are there many people in Greenland in favor of the project continuing? The opposing movement mainly grounded on human security for environmental degradation, criticism of Greenland minerals and foreign investments as a neo-imperial project, economic sovereignty, or on other factors. And she wrote a follow-up to this. She says, as a Faroese herself, she's very interested in the Greenlandic sovereignty, decolonization movement, and the revitalized discussion on Denmark having been an imperial and colonial state. Do you think relation to the Faroe Island will change with the new government, especially solidarity in the pro-sovereignty movement and IA Tjolveldi, Faroese National Left corporations, also in relation to the increasing interest for foreign actors, such as the great powers, foreign investment, and NATO? So an easy question to answer for you, Nitek.
That's a lot of questions. Let me start, with the Greenland project. Yeah, there are actually, I mean, quite a lot, both parties and people in favor of it, because, as I said, if we are to, for example, see it from a more, I think, economic and financial perspective, because, one of our goals is to decrease the dependence on the block grant that we see from Denmark each year. I mean, they see, for example, the Greenland project as a way of, to achieve that goal. But it's impossible, I think, to say, or I can't say, kind of the percentage of, who's for and who's against, but it's more from, the discussions that I've been observing, from different discussions on that issue. But the environmental, issue then came, I think, in front of everything else, as we can see from the results of the elections, both to the parliament, but also the municipal elections in the South Greenland. That showed, that a large number of people were not satisfactory with the environmental presentation of how they were going to deal with, with that particular issue. But I'm probably kind of also oversimplify. I'm trying to oversimplify, the different voices, because of course there are some who think, this is a new imperial project, with foreigners coming in and making a lot of money out of our resources, but then on the other side also, people who are saying that, this will greatly help in achieving kind of a economic, self-sufficiency from Denmark. So, but in terms of these other questions, the relation to the Faroe Islands, that's, I don't know if they will change with the new government. I think, we have different institutions in place, for example, the parliamentary cooperation between Greenland, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands in the West Nordic Council, and we have, I think, historic relations people-to-people contact are pretty strong between, I think, Faroese and Greenlanders. So, and I don't think those will necessarily change, with that. But I have been, observing, also the Faroese, debate on sovereignty and and the relationship between Faroe Islands and Denmark over the years, and I know some. I've worked with some Faroese, in my past postings in Brussels, so I have also, friends from Faroe Islands, and we continue, I think, to discuss, those kind of issues and compare, compare notes, so to speak. But we're very much in the same position vis-a-vis Denmark, because Denmark has to treat us kind of equally when it comes to giving us some kind of some powers, for example, in foreign relations and in other issues. So we will continue, I think, to watch closely what the Faroe Islands does, and for example, what they gain in terms of both agreements with Denmark, but also with others. But I know there's, the Danish government has just presented a military package, of 1.5 billion Danish kroner, which is about maybe 200 million, roughly speaking, US dollars, to increase their capabilities in the Arctic. That includes, Greenland, but also very much the Faroe Islands, in building a new radar, in the Faroe Islands for a lot of money. I think the estimated cost is about maybe 80 million. But I'll be watching, I think, what the Faroese, government and parliament will be, comes out with, because from what I understand, the Faroese and Denmark will negotiate, on that issue. So.
Thank you, Nutek. We have time maybe for a couple more questions, and I think there was one follow-up from Sam in the chat. Sam, again, would you like to unmute yourself to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. Just in terms of Greenland's sort of potential independence that you sort of referenced earlier, and it's sort of how to balance its economy and diversify in preparation for that. Can you see tourism playing a greater role potentially than mining for Denmark's economy? And are there tensions between the two in terms of environmental sustainability, or is there an easy way to balance that?
That's a very good question, because if we work with Iceland, for example, on the tourism issue, because I think tourism is underdeveloped. But at the same time, we also hearing from Iceland that don't copy us, because they were, I think, beginning to realize that they received too many, pre-COVID, and the environmental impact, tourists had, on their environment and nature, actually. So I think the issue for us is, yes, there are perspectives, and there is, I think, much greater potential for Greenland to develop its tourism sector. But I think we can all agree that mass tourism is not going to be the answer. But so it will be a question of where do you find kind of a the balance between that. But at the same time, one of the reasons that we're developing our for example, airport infrastructure is to be able to have more direct connections with the rest of the world, because right now our airport infrastructure is something that we have inherited from the US, actually. These are former US bases, for example, and where that have the longest runways, and those are located, far away from the population centers. And so that's, which makes travel kind of a, more ineffective, so to speak. So yes, absolutely. I think what we can present to the world, and I also see, tourism as an education. I mean, there's an important education component, for people who visit Greenland to be able to learn, what life is, get a little bit of insight into what life conditions are like, in that kind of environment. So.
Thank you very much again. Cheers.
Sure.
Okay, and the last question is from our second speaker of the day. So a question from Ala.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Thank you, Untitled, for a very inspiring and interesting talk. Very thought-provoking as well. A quick question from me. How is marine governance organized? Is it Greenland who has competence, or is Denmark who has competence in these matters?
I mean, yeah, that's a good question, because when it comes to fisheries, it's Greenland that has a competence, for example. But when it comes to the environment, Greenland has a competence, for example, to 3 nautical miles, but from 3 nautical, but I mean, might be corrected, but either it's 3 or 12 nautical miles that we are, have the responsibility of, environmentally. But I think from either 3 or 12 to 200, in the exclusive economic zone, that's a competence of Denmark, from a sovereignty perspective as well. But at the same time, we have also a process of extending our continental shelf, and that, when it comes to, for example, potential mineral exploitation, for example, because we have the authority on mineral exploitation, also oil and gas, it will be Greenland's responsibility. So it can quickly become murky, but I think the main thing to remember is that what was also said, in the new coalition agreement, nothing about us without us. So, and that's something that also extends to both the defense and national security issues, because we've been saying for many years, if you're going to talk, about Greenlandic issues, even in those areas that we don't have any competence over, you have to include us. That's, I mean, we've been saying to Denmark, and that, that now is applicable. I think we've been able, I think, to get through, Denmark on a number of issues. So it will, yeah. Even if it is a Danish competence, we will still have, I think, a say.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Inutek, for your time and for your presentation, and for taking the time also to answer all our questions today. So I think we'll jump next to our second speaker today. So our second speaker today is Dr. Ala Poznakova, who, excuse me, he's a professor of maritime law at the University of Oslo. And again, if you have any questions during Ala's presentation, please feel free to type them in the chat as we go. Please, Ala, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Romain. Thank you to you and Victoria, who is not here, for inviting me and giving me opportunity to share my thoughts with you all. And again, thank you, Untitled, for your interesting presentation that, and it's thought-provoking, as I said, and I also thought about Norway and Norwegian issues regarding the various questions that you brought up, including state security and investment. And well, I've been professor at the University of Oslo for 15 years or so, and have been living in Norway. I will touch upon one of the Norwegian regulations in my presentation. But my home country is Latvia, which doesn't position itself very actively as an Arctic state, apart from fighting with Norway about snow crabs and Svalbard or Spitsbergen. And I'm fluent in Russian, so I've done some research on Russian maritime safety regulations in the Arctic. So I will come back to Russia as one of the examples, relevant examples on that matter. But I just speaking about this investment and state security, it's very topical in Norway just now, because I think yesterday, or well, these days, Norwegian Parliament stopped a deal and prohibited selling a Norwegian company which is called Bergen Engines, that produces, you know, like motors for military ships and does some maintenance and so forth to Russian buy, or like a company owned by Russian interests. The law is not particularly good on that, so they will have to improve it. But the point was to address the potential security concerns that may arise. So it's or maybe it's just before the parliamentary elections, you know, to to make a lot of noise about how the government almost missed this deal. But of course, we also have issues about Chinese investment, and well, the country needs foreign investment, but also I guess it's quite complicated, and it's can be difficult to address it with law, by prohibiting this kind of things. But I will go back to my topic, and I will build on what Inotek said in the beginning of his presentation about the changes in the Arctic environment, and that is also felt in Greenland, and there is less ice. There are new species coming, and of course this is also something that Norway is experiencing. Now I've been working mostly with shipping, and I thought I will use shipping as a sort of an activity to focus on. So I will probably miss some other interesting aspects of Arctic regulation. And because I'm a lawyer, I have a legal background, so I will speak about law, which is a very important tool to address these tensions between economic interests. Like we need natural resources, we need shipping on the one hand, and interests related to human health, marine environmental protection on the other hand. As we'll look into more detail in a second, the law is also essential to address the conflicts that arise between different users, between different states, whose companies want to use the same maritime areas, for example. And of course, now then when there is less ice in the Arctic Ocean, it's still quite difficult to sail there, but it's less ice, and it's the practical opportunities to access the areas that are very remote, used to be very remote. They are more. So we can expect that there will be more users, more companies, more states behind these companies that would go in the areas that were where you had hypothetically freedom of navigation, but it was kind of different to actually exercise it, you know. So when there will be more crowded, it will be more tension, more conflicts, and of course the environmental dimension that will be the focus of my presentation will also be say problematized at a completely different level. Now, let's see. I have some slides, of course, with some pictures and some text. So I will now let's see. There's share. No. So, and I was thinking about the title for my presentation, and I thought, well, legal solutions and challenges shouldn't be like legal challenges and solutions, but that's the intended formulation. I will take a look at some of the legal solutions that we have so far, and what challenges that still exist and will persist to exist in the future, I think. Now, and many of these challenges and issues, they're not peculiar to the Arctic Ocean. They're peculiar to the law as such, and the international law in particular, that fails to address some of the difficult aspects, especially relating to something called common interests well, everybody's interested in, but no one feels really direct responsibility in protecting. And like we want to use it as well. I will focus on the local pressures on the Arctic environment caused by shipping, but I think it is fair to mention that, of course, Arctic environment and Arctic marine environment is not suffering just from the pressures and sources of pollution existing like locally in that area. There is this picture here. I'll just they have this picture here. It shows the air pollution, all produced in the northwestern hemisphere, in the industrial regions, and it all goes up to the Arctic. And also we know that also air pollution produced much farther than the northern hemisphere also ends up in the Arctic. Marine plastic pollution comes from South Asia, and so it's really Arctic is suffering from the pressures that are produced elsewhere, and that is kind of tricky for the law to address, because it's a number of states that produce this pollution, so it's kind of difficult to point out that you should do that particular thing because everybody's doing that. But I will, so having mentioned that, I will leave this particular problem aside, and I will focus on the shipping. Here's it's a very nice picture. I took it. I think it's a bit unfair because I could have taken another nastier picture of like I don't know, bulk carrier or something, or submarine or whatever. But you see that this is a research vessel in the ice, and it produces some air pollution. It produces light pollution, it produces noise pollution, probably some water pollution as well, and maybe some ice pollution. So it's a lot of impacts on the Arctic environment that comes from even such relatively small vessel that has to be addressed in one way or the other. And on the picture here, you can see that, well, these are classes of ships, so it doesn't really matter, but there is not so much traffic over here. It's the central Arctic Ocean still covered by ice. So we don't see actual commercial cargo vessels sailing there. It's more like for the future, perhaps. Depends on how it goes, maybe not in our lifetimes. But there is more shipping taking place here. And just to, it's a bit difficult to get precise information on the quantity or amount of ships, how many ships are sailing there with cargo. But it's not that much truly international cargo ships sailing like through the whole northeastern coast. It's really not so much. Most of the shipping takes place from Russia eastward, carrying LNG, for example, and also westward from, I don't know, someplace here to westward. So, but there is, of course, this idea of economic feasibility of using this passage, or well, Northern Sea route, more like in Russian terms, to provide an alternative to other routes existing, which is it's a bit shorter way, but it's a bit difficult to say how realistic it will be. I will first say something about international law and how international law addresses the pressures emanating from shipping on the Arctic. And then I hope that I will not talk so long that there will be no time. I'd like to address two examples of national measures dealing with shipping, and maybe some other questions as well, but mostly formally, at least, the environmental pressures from shipping. I'll see it there. I've tried to present, of course, there is already a very complex international legal regime applicable to the Arctic Ocean. I use this quotation from Ilulissat Declaration made by, USA, Russia, Canada, and Denmark, I think, saying a lot of different things. In particular, that there's already an extensive international framework applicable to the Arctic Ocean, and also saying that these Arctic coastal states consider themselves to have stewardship for the Arctic because of their location and also expertise in the area. And well, this declaration was not warmly welcomed by other states, or at least some of the other states that also wanted to engage in the Arctic dialogue. But I think that this citation is quite a good starting point. And of course, we know that international law generally and UN Charter applies in the Arctic, so no use of force and so forth. But perhaps the most important treaty really is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. It was adopted back in 1982, and coastal Arctic states had already had some Arctic regulations and policies and visions for the Arctic, also already before this convention was adopted. But it's quite important. It's not very detailed, to say the least, on particular Arctic issues, but it sets out the jurisdiction of states and sovereign rights, and it also makes the International Maritime Organization the competent organization to adopt more specific safety rules, maritime safety rules for ships. Or that organization also existed before the convention was adopted, but it does quite important work, and well, Polar Code amending SOLAS and MARPOL conventions is an example of actually quite an important accomplishment. But it does have weaknesses and deficiencies that make this global legal regulation incomplete in the Arctic. And one of these deficiencies that is quite obvious is sort of a lot of focus on the freedom of navigation, also free seas, and this kind of divided ocean approach. So the states know that the flag state has the main responsibility for ships. Coastal states have certain jurisdiction and sovereign rights in their maritime zones. So it's kind of very divided by zone and by the type of state, and it really entrusts responsibility for safety and environment to the flag state. And the ocean is not, well, in terms of nature is not divided in zones. It has ecosystems that don't really care about the political borders. So this kind of the approach in the traditional law of the sea is obviously not sufficient for to address the environmental protection in a holistic way. And of course, it also has like specific practical implication that it's not really working the way it should. But there is also important bilateral and regional framework existing, and which opens more to take this ecosystem approach to the environmental protection, and look in particular the shipping is one of the pressures that could be addressed by states together. So it's just to mention as an example, OSPAR cooperation is crucial, but then a disadvantage is that Russia is not a member, so it's kind of a very long Arctic coast is not really included in this kind of cooperation. And then I also wanted to mention Arctic Council, which is not well, what is it really? It's just a forum, we can say, but they did manage to negotiate 3 conventions that were adopted, and one of them including the Arctic pollution and preparedness and response. So it has and also does quite a lot of work on the research of the Arctic environment. So it's an important forum, and it has had certain achievements that I think should be mentioned here. But what kind of legal impact really it has, it's a bit of a different matter for a different class. Now there's also like some new and future rules that are coming around that actually reflect again the problem that the international law is struggling with in the Arctic as it does in other regions. And one of these conventions that is already in force is Convention for the Prevention of Unregulated Fisheries in the Central Arctic Ocean. It's not a very pressing practical problem so far. There is not so much fisheries going on exactly in that region, very high up north. But it's of course also a bit of an issue how you deal with the third states that are not parties to that convention. And then another one that is also a bit, we'll see whether it succeeds or not, is the a new law of the sea convention on the biodiversity beyond in areas beyond national jurisdiction, which could be very crucial for Arctic, especially for the water column in the Arctic, because we don't know how much seabed beyond national jurisdiction will remain, especially after this recent Russian submission on the extended continental shelf. It doesn't really leave much of the seabed for the international, for the community as a whole. So it's, but the water column, high seas, is obviously a candidate to be regulated in a more holistic way under this instrument, but we don't know it yet. So just to sum up a bit about the advantages of the global regulation is that, well, of course, shipping is an international area, so you have to have global rules for it to work, and that's the whole point of this convention. And the states are given certain responsibilities to make sure that standards are okay. The disadvantage is, on the one hand, that not all states are party. Even, well, United States hasn't ratified UNCLOS, but it does accept some of its provision, not all of them, obviously, but some of them as customary international law, which is a good thing, and it is also bound by the predecessors to UNCLOS. So it's and it's party to IMO conventions, but still this third state issue in the Arctic will remain. And then another thing is that international law binds states, but many of the economic activities are actually conducted by the companies, and so the flag state has to make sure that it adopts the laws that to supervise its ships in the Arctic in an adequate way. So it's kind of, to regulate and enforce rules against the private actor using the Arctic resources, using the Arctic maritime areas is vested into states. So it's kind of a long chain and it does not always work the way it should. I was going to say, And I just remain, just should let me know if I talk too long, you know. Now let's see. There you go. So just to say a couple of more words about UNCLOS and shipping in the Arctic. Well, firstly, just one provision in UNCLOS that actually addresses areas that are Arctic and well, also obviously polar waters in Antarctica, but it's not. I think it's a bit less important there. I think it's really Arctic Ocean that is targeted here. But UNCLOS is relevant because of this general applicable rules for the flag states, coastal states and port states. And again, as I mentioned, it's the flag state that has the primary responsibility. So it's, as we see elsewhere, it's not that much that other states can do if you have this flag of convenience that is sailing. But one thing that international law and well, conventional law does is to make sure that there is some minimum standard for shipping that all flag states have to comply with. And they, well, whether they do it in reality or not is a different issue, of course, but they do establish the generally accepted international rules and standards, and IMO then kind of fills out with detailed rules. And the problem we have seen now, of course, I'm quite happy that there is a polar code around that sets out provisions. Now it's binding. It has been first adopted as kind of guidelines for the states to follow if they want to, but now it's binding, and it does set out some structural condition requirements for ships, operational requirements for ships, rules relating to discharges and well, safety equipment and so forth. So it, of course, it's a very important step towards better safety in the Arctic, not just environmental safety, but also safety more generally. But and you can see on this picture here, you see the geographical limits of this code in the Arctic. It also applies to polar waters in the Antarctica that I'm not going to talk about today. But as all IMO conventions, it does have weaknesses. And one of the weaknesses is that well, while it does provide for standards, it leaves a significant amount of discretion to flag states. Of course, the flag states are always allowed to adopt stricter standards for their own ships, but not all states do. So there is a number of loopholes in this instrument, as it is in other IMO conventions, which is quite unfortunate for firstly, and then but it is at least it's a good try to address the conflict between the economic interests of a flag state to ship as cheap as possible, and the interests of the coastal states to protect their marine environment. And there is this kind of I think something that you can call a deficiency or a gap in this convention. It really doesn't seem to be too concerned with maybe it's unfair to say too concerned with the marine environment beyond the areas under national jurisdiction of coastal states. So the high seas, of course, all this the rules they do apply on the high seas. Obviously, that's why they have been adopted. But it's really the point is really to balance the flag states' freedom of navigation against the coastal states' interest to protect their own marine areas against the pollution. So it's not environment. Here you do see that environment is kind of, it's lifted up to a new level, but it is still, I guess, it's also an international law. It's still a matter of compromise between economic interests and more idealistic interests of the environmental protection. So this is, it's not always satisfactory. And also IMO is a flag state organization, so you can see that I will get back to that point a bit later on, also that compromise among states necessary to adopt global regulation kind of washes out the stringency of the standards that are eventually adopted. And that's where Article 234 can be very useful for coastal states. And I will just, I guess that's a nice exercise to read. Well, I don't have to do it now, but I just couldn't avoid first posting the whole provision. You can say that it's a bit of a, you can read it later. I will just make the main points. You see that this provision is quite interesting. Coastal states, it has been negotiated between USA, Canada, and Soviet Union. So other states were not really that interested in that. It's these three states that stood behind the text. And they had already had regulations of their own concerning Arctic waters, and Canada had quite still controversial rules concerning its jurisdiction and sovereignty over Northwest Passage. And Soviet Union had also some rules related to its own coastal waters. So this came as a kind of compromise between these three states, and the United States wanted to exercise freedom of navigation both ways. So it's kind of it's written a lot about the history of this article, so I will not repeat it. But the point here is that coastal states can adopt and enforce, which is really a big step outside normal international law framework, laws and regulations for the prevention of pollution. So it's only prevention of pollution. It's not like state security interests, for example, that could be invoked, just marine environment. And it has to be within ice-covered areas, which is a bit of an unclear concept, but basically there has to be ice most of the year, dangerous enough to obstruct navigation, and it only has to be within the limits of exclusive economic zone. So not the high seas, but within the limits of exclusive economic zone. There is no reference to IMO, so international organization does not have any competence to deal with this. Coastal states are free to adopt their own rules as they want. So this is, if you think about it, it's quite a major step outside the normal balance adopted in UNCLOS between flag states and coastal states and what they can regulate, and certainly goes well beyond the what could be allowed under the right of innocent passage in the territorial sea, and way beyond what is normally allowed for coastal states to regulate and do with regard to foreign vessels in the exclusive economic zones. So it's and whether we can take a look, as my next point is how Russia uses this to regulate sailing in Northern Sea route. So I have a chance to say some words about my two specific examples, I guess. Still some time for that. So here you see, well, the Northern Sea route, which I mentioned earlier. It's, well, the ambition, at least some years ago, the ambition was to open it for international navigation, so that ships could actually sail from west to east and from east to west alongside this route. And it's a bit unclear whether it's going to be a reality for different reasons in the years, in the nearest future. So now it's mostly, as far as I know, it's mostly Russian gas, oil and gas being transported westward and eastward. well, by Russian ships, but also there are of course also foreign companies, like including Norwegian companies operating there, but not so much real international traffic. Well, Northern Sea Route is the kind of domestic concept. You also see it's also referred to as Northeastern Passage. It's more like international notion, but whereas Northern Sea Route is more like a developed term in Russia, and it's been around since I think early years of the Soviet Union in one way or the other. And there has been a bit different kind of opinions on what exactly a legal regime for this maritime areas is, and at least no one thought so much about environmental protection decades ago. But now well, the newest version of the rules and the preceding rules, they are adopted to on the basis of Article 234, and a little bit, I guess, on the basis of like historic rights. But you know, historic rights and international law is a bit of a tricky concept. So it's not really sure whether Russia actually can invoke this kind of title. But 234 seems to be applicable. And the area for the Northern Sea Route, it covers internal waters, or what Russia regards as internal waters, territorial waters, well, territorial sea, up to 12 nautical miles, at least in Russia. And in Norway, that would also be the case, 12 nautical miles. And also exclusive economic zone of up to 200 nautical miles. So it's, and there you have, under normal law of the sea rules, a bit different rights. States have the right of innocent passage, for example, in territorial sea, and freedom of navigation, exclusive economic zone. So you cannot really, normally, you cannot require prior notice beyond internal waters at all. You cannot ask for permit, and you cannot, unless you have a very special situation, you cannot ask for the information about the route, and you cannot impose fees for pilotage. Well, you can present some rules to IMO in the territorial sea, but not this kind of rules. And well, it does seem that, well, the wording of Article 234 may kind of accommodate requirements to the extent they're really necessary to protect the marine environment. But I think maybe it's not really, the question is not so acute yet, because there is not so many ships, foreign ships navigating there. But one could think that it could be a major problem in the future. And, you know, this passage of the foreign military ship that was not announced some years ago, it stirred up the Russian government quite a lot. And I think that what they decided to do is to ask foreign, well, not just commercial vessels, because this is basically for commercial cargo ships, but also foreign naval and state-owned vessels for permission to enter, and like prior notice 45 or something days in advance, and everything like this, and to be able to sail in the Northern Sea Route. And that is a much more complicated issue, because it doesn't seem that, at least in my view, it doesn't seem that Law of the Sea Convention actually opens for this kind of requirements, unless you really manage to make a really good case based on, I don't know, historic rights, which is also quite doubtful here. So it's an interesting example of, well, could work for commercial cargo vessels with all these requirements, because we have Article 234, and global rules are not good enough. And but military vessels and this kind of submarines and all this is a bit more difficult to reconcile with the law of the sea, which is perhaps less of environmental but more of a state security issue for Russia, I guess. But so I also mentioned the requirement to comply with Polar Code, and this brings me to my next example, which I will mention of Norway, because and I will explain why. So it's in Norway. Well, I think I make a very idealistic picture of Norway and its environmental regulations right now, because this ban on the use of heavy fuel oil of Svalbard has been kind of viewed as a very positive example of environmental regulation, which is unilateral, because IMO is not there yet, and it's kind of difficult. It's really, most ships use heavy fuel oil, so you cannot just ban it, because then most ships will not be able to sail. And IMO has been working towards phasing out this fuel, but these rules that you see here, they are adopted, but they have many loopholes, they have many exceptions, so they may not be working for the Arctic. And actually Russia is kind of one of the states that were actually against IMO rules of more extensive scope, because then it was concerned with commercial feasibility of shipping in the Northern Sea route in particular. So it's has been a bit of a trouble there. So Norway went ahead and continued what it already did since 2007. In 2007, it was ban on heavy fuel oil in the marine protected areas of Svalbard, and then in natural reserves. And now it's all the 12 nautical mile territorial sea around Svalbard has this prohibition of ban on ships carrying heavy fuel oil or being fueled by heavy fuel oil. But then again, is it compatible with the law of the sea? It could be quite a bit of a trouble, actually. A good thing for Norway, a trouble with this unilateral kind of rules. But the good thing is that it's not so many, there's no really international traffic. So it's not like many ships sailing from one place in the east to west, crossing territorial sea of Svalbard. Mostly it's cruise ships. So it's like local kind of shipping. But already then, like if you have a Russian cruise ship sailing to Svalbard with tourists crossing territorial sea, can you really prohibit, can you really have these bans? I think I will not try to answer this question now. Norway thinks that yes, it's possible. I'm a bit more skeptical, although I do like the idea of banning this fuel, but I'm a bit more skeptical to compliance with the law of the sea in this particular case. I think that we can come back to these examples in questions if you have some. But I'd like to just before I round up to say some words. Now, what I've been talking before, of course, is the attempts to address pollution of the marine environment in the Arctic through global rules. They don't always work, and they have to be like maritime zone based. They have to be activity based. So they usually fail to have this holistic approach to the ocean. And then I talked about unilateral rules, just by using a couple of examples in Norway and Russia of states trying to do a bit more to protect the marine environment and maybe do some other interests, but that's not the point. But that is also it's also zone based, and it's not probably it's not just good enough. So we need perhaps to have this kind of what a professor, a colleague of mine, called for a paradigm shift from divided oceans to common ocean and to protection of community interests in the ocean. And the ocean is a value in itself, and that is far more difficult in the international law. So you have to have actually operationalized this ecosystem-based approach. And there is already a lot of work done, both at the international level and national level, on this integrated management approach to ocean governance. You need to introduce better compliance and monitoring systems to see whether states actually meet their and private actors meet their obligations. So it's that would be a way better manner to govern the Arctic marine environment from shipping and other pressures. But we're not just there yet. So I think that on this point I can stop and just let's see, stop share. Yes, and give you opportunity to ask questions if you have some.
Thank you very much, Ella, for such a thorough overview of the legal framework. UNCLOS Article 234, the NSR, the Polar Code, marine pollution. I think you covered everything. And I think we have several questions already in the chat box. One from, if I'm not mistaken, there's one from Sam. Sam, would you like to unmute yourself, please? I think there's two from you, so you can ask you two questions.
Okay, thank you. Cool. Thank you for a really great presentation. The first question is, to what extent can continental shelf claimants regulate shipping over that area to protect their seabed resources and the environment on it? Because I've seen it noted that it could have a fairly significant impact potentially on the regulation of sort of surface vessels. And I'm thinking primarily with Russia's claims, like recent claims to CLCS about extending its sort of continental shelf right up to Canada's EEZ. And my second question is just to ask you to go into the Article 234 and the NSR a bit more, with the dispute between Russia and others over Russia's right to regulate the route, where it sort of uses that as a partly part of its case. But then in practice sort of is try to introduce legislation to make only Russian-made ships operate on it sort of mainly. Do you see a sort of way forward where from a legal perspective there could be a legal framework to resolve this dispute, or is it more a sort of political sphere kind of bargaining chip between sort of great power competition with like the UK and US committing to like naval patrols now in the area to sort of challenge what they perceive as Russian dominance of it?
Yeah, yes, thank you. It's two quite big questions, and well, I think it's interesting that you bring up this Russian claim, resubmission to the Commission on Continental Shelf, and which basically covers most of the international seabed, but also like Denmark and Canada also quite greedy there. So I wouldn't blame Russia. We'll see how in several years how it goes. Well, you know, all states preserve freedom of navigation above beyond above the continental shelf, and also well, above what is exclusive economic zone. So it's the states, the coastal states who have some activities on their continental shelves, well, they can have safety zones around their installations, and I think that it's where they can regulate a little bit, and I think it's generally like 500 meters safety zone, so it's not that large, and I think it's even like it's maximum, because you can apply to IMO but it has to be approved, and so it's basically flag states will be able to continue shipping. Of course, they take into regard to the activities of it, but we don't know how states will actually, because we'll see that in this Arctic Sunrise case, which I don't know if you know, which was in the Barents Sea and just on the regular continental shelf, Russia had a way larger safety zone around that installation, which was I don't know 3 nautical miles or something. So it was really much larger than the Sea Convention explicitly allows. So, but yeah, it's all states have to take due regard to each other, and you cannot really close up maritime areas around your activities other than this 500 meters or something. So this is and well, we don't know how much resources there will be actually, but your other question was about the Northern Sea route, yes, and yeah, and then yeah, I think it's this Russian requirements of Russian flag for cabotage ships has been has not been particularly welcome, but I think it sounded like a mostly economic decision, or maybe it's a kind of lobby to protect the Russian flagged ships. So that was a bit weird, I thought, but they do allow, foreign ships navigating abroad. And I think that I'm not really an expert on politics behind this Northern Sea route, but it seems to me over the years that the politics has been like actually going up and down, and it's I think it is related to the changes in geopolitical perception by Russia of what is safe, and you can just see this reaction to that foreign naval ship that popped up, and okay, now we need a decree prohibiting or like requiring this prior notice. So it's a bit like this. I'm not sure whether you can see like a really consistent view on the regulation, but yeah.
No, thank you very much, then.
Okay, we have a question from, actually 2 questions again, from KK Davis. Would you like to unmute yourself, please?
Hello, Ala.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your overview. And Samuel, are you sure you don't want your second question?
Oh,
Yes,
no,
I'm reading your question, so just go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. When considering the large marine ecosystems, the shared large marine ecosystems in the Arctic, for instance, there's 2 countries may share within the same LME. What do you believe to be the most effective approach for the future of maritime governance? And do you think there is an opportunity for strengthening bilateral regional cooperation to ensure protection against, especially something like IUUs, which, illegal, unreported, unregulated fisheries, which can affect more than one party within a shared LME? Do you believe NGOs might be a key player in exercising more pressure?
Well, I think that bilateral or regional cooperation is the key to actually, let's say, operationalize and will make this approach more effective, because otherwise, like you have this border between exclusive economic zones of the 2 states, and you regulate within your own zone, but you don't really know how the other states regulate. So I think that strengthening this bilateral or it could be multilateral cooperation between states is the key. I think shipping is of course tricky here, because especially when there is more foreign third-party flagged ships that navigate, because you don't have very good mechanisms in the law of the sea convention which would govern that, enabling coastal states to regulate, and especially the borderline between exclusive economic zone and the high seas. And when it comes to fisheries, so it's necessary with regional cooperation, and it's necessary to do something about the cooperation at the IMO level as well. But fisheries, there's already quite a lot of cooperation regarding fisheries and regional fisheries management agreements that could serve as an example, because they have compliance mechanisms, and you can see that states actually even Norway, Russia, I think, is a prime example, that they may have disagreements about very many questions, including state security, but they're actually quite good in cooperating on this pragmatic fisheries related issues, and on a bilateral level. So yeah, we'll see. I think it's still necessary to strengthen it a bit more to make sure that third states are parties to that. But yeah.
Let's see. I After I had posed my first question or chunk of questions, you were speaking about Article 234, and does Article 234 leave the state an option for mitigation via litigation? Does it allow for individual states to somehow apply, pressure through litigation, or
if you think maybe domestic litigation, well, I think what Article 234 does specifically is to allow states to take enforcement steps against foreign vessels. It's not so much concerned with fisheries, but with pollution. And I think that you can read quite a lot into this enforcement provision, because normally you cannot really detain, well, unless in fisheries and like in specific circumstances, you cannot really detain a foreign vessel for polluting your exclusive economic zone. You really have to wait for this vessel to come to your port if you're lucky. But this provision opens for enforcement. It doesn't say anything about litigation, but it, in my view, it could be interpreted to include all kinds of domestic measures against that ship, including domestic proceedings. But then when it comes to international litigation, it's a bit different from what I was talking about now. So it's I will not comment on that unless you ask me to. But then again, I think that perhaps an irony is that coastal states are not so eager to conduct domestic proceedings for ships that have polluted their coastal areas, unless it's a really big disaster. So it's not like they're standing in line to impose penalties for this. And of course, it will be, if coastal state does litigate against the ship, it will be basically the crew, the master and the crew, and maybe the shipping company, depending on the law of that state. But the flag state that is that has the primary responsibility for overall responsibility for safety, then this litigation would have to be taken at the international level. And you don't have really this big pollution cases between the states that I know of. But it certainly could be an option. But there has to be like really will to do so. But you also mentioned NGOs, and well, Law of the Sea Convention is not so good on NGOs because they don't have any rights. And you saw also in the Arctic Sunrise case, they were not allowed even to be like amicus curiae position in the court. But I think that in practice they do quite important work. And well, I'm not sure about Russia, by the way. I may have some doubts about that. But in Norway, they have been behind some of the important environmental cases, not so much, well, concerning our Arctic, including that, but of course, that they cannot win always. It's a bit difficult in Norway to win against the government in Norway. But they do have quite an important role and in that legal sense as well. I think I kind of answer it a bit but I hope that.
No, that's very good. Thank you.
Okay, so we have time for 2 more questions, I think. And there's one that was sent to me directly by Jawaha. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself, Jawaha?
Yes, good evening. Thank you for your interesting presentation. What I'd like you to comment upon are any differences in regulations between Canada and Russia with respect to regulation of the Northwest Passage and the Northern Sea Route. because Russian regulations are relatively new, but as you would be aware, the Canadian regulations are very old, and there's a very famous incident of 1969, followed by another incident in 1985, where there were differences of opinion between Canada and the US on passage across the Northwestern Passage.
Yes, I can comment briefly because, well, you can see, so you can draw some parallels between this Canadian and Russian approach, as I understand it, because it's not always very consistently presented. You know, as I understand, Canada is, well, it has enclosed this archipelago with this Northwestern Passage in straight baselines and invoked historic title. But just correct me if you know. But my understanding is this historic title that kind of Canada thinks entitles it to claim sovereignty and then preclude foreign ships to sail or like require that they have to permit and so forth, and also invoke environmental concerns and what have you. And so that's a famous accident or case, and some others where United States exercised freedom of navigation and kind of challenged that position, kind of illustrated that disagreement. And in that sense, Russia is a bit more vague about this historic rights claim. It does supply straight baselines. You kind of so you can see perhaps this historic title in a way between the lines, but I think what also giving them the sovereignty and so forth, which I think is a bit tricky in the Arctic, which is not like, how do you show consistent use? I mean, you have to, although Law of the Sea Convention doesn't really give you the details about the historic titles, I mean, you have to meet certain, like you have to have used traditionally and so forth, and these are areas that have not been so used for by navigation in centuries, you know, so it's unlike more southern parts of the world. But there is this kind of comparison could be made, yes. But I think Russia is more, and perhaps Canada today as well, invokes 234 as the kind of the main legal basis, and I think that is more justified. But then, of course, the problem there would be these military ships that are kind of not seems to fall outside 234, and that is a question that remains controversial in international law, because states have Law of the Sea Convention doesn't really lay out a very detailed regime for military ships. It says a bit on sovereign immunity, a bit on I think it's 236 that says that environmental rules do not apply to military ships. It's flag states that have to be like diligent, and so it still remains. But some states are quite bastant that they have full freedom of navigation. Other states says, though, we can regulate military ships in our territorial sea and so forth. So I think we have to leave this issue a bit open by now. Yeah, so there are some similarities, yes, between Canadian and Russian position, but I think they're a bit Russia is a bit vague on that side. So
Thank you.
I'm not a fan of historic title claim, as you can see.
And our last question for today is from Arabella. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question, please?
Yes, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I was just wondering if states could be made, or let's not say states, but producers of maritime pollution, and I mean especially maritime litter or plastics or pollution which is not convinced with a vessel which is driving through the world, but pollution where the origin is not very clear. Can or is any law regulation, international law regulation there, which can be those producers can be responsible for, or is it just a problem of the states who have the impacts of the pollution, maritime pollution?
Well, the problem with producers is, in the sense, companies or corporations, is that they are governed by nation law. So you may find perhaps some recommendations on how you should deal with this kind of corporations, but international law doesn't really allow you to target this private companies. It's quite difficult. It's the states that are responsible in international law to prevent transboundary marine pollution and so forth. And then it's a very big issue. And then of course sometimes it can be difficult to identify the specific states, and normally it's several states that pollute together. They have an obligation under international law to prevent land-based pollution, I think maybe it's not that hard to actually identify which states are behind that, because it's the rivers that produce a lot of plastic pollution, and the major rivers you can kind of find where they are. But then again, and the states in theory they could have shared responsibility in international law for this kind of damage, but it will be difficult for the injured state to actually go ahead with this kind of claim, because you have to show the wrongful act, you have to show the causation, you have to carry out this whole process, and it's probably not the way to go. So it's better to target the pollution where it emanates, and that is a bit of a challenge. There is some regional cooperation which I'm not so much, don't have so much expertise on, but which kind of targets a marine litter at the regional level, because it enables states to cooperate and to monitor compliance and take some measures to deal with that. But it's really extremely difficult for Arctic coastal states to deal with the pollution that comes from I don't know, Southern Hemisphere. International law is just not good enough or not equipped to do that. Though we always see some cooperation in air pollution, for example, so it's not impossible, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that very good answer.
Well, yeah, if you are very interested in marine plastic pollution, there is work going on, and it's not just about the Arctic. And there is a report that identifies the applicable rules and legal regimes, and you have multitude of rules that already are there, but it's kind of very difficult to apply them all effectively. It's so fragmented and so complex. But there is also this idea about International Convention on Marine Plastic Litter. So we'll see where it will lead us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ala. And this concludes this week's session of our Arctic Spring College. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Please join me once again in thanking our two amazing speakers, Ada Posnakova and Inutek Olsen, for their presentations today. The next session, session 5 of the Arctic Spring College 2021, will take place on Tuesday next week. And in the meantime, take care, everyone.
Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure, and thank you for your questions and discussion. That has been fun. Thank you, and take care.